we have to visit the big three: Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. I want to start out with Penn State. Is Penn State a national championship contender, or is that asking too much for Franklin entering his first season of the 12-team playoff, which he should make? If they don't make the 12-team playoff, I think that he should actually face hot seat talk. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm with you about the playoff. I do not see Penn State as a national championship contender. And it's just so, I hate to just go off blanket assumptions based on the past, but it's very hard for me to look at a team that has lost to Michigan year after year, has lost to Ohio State even longer, going back farther than that. Their last Big Ten championship was 2016. Correct, I believe it was 2016. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, it was.
And it's just tough. I mean, that's nearly 10 years ago now, and it's hard for me to look at that team and a team that, frankly, and allow me to go on a little bit of a rant here, seemed like they just horrendously misused Drew Allar, a guy with a ridiculous amount of arm talent. Did he look like the most poised guy in the world? No, obviously not. But guess what? That's on the coaching staff to get him right and to allow him to make throws that give him confidence. He looked like he was trapped in a box all season, had no options, had nowhere to go with the ball, was never allowed to uncork that big arm of his. And it was frustrating to watch him play in games and feel like this guy has so much talent, but he's allowed to use 5% of it because all he's allowed to do is throw 45-year-old Tom Brady checkdowns. So it's really hard for me to pick that team as a national championship contender. Should they make the playoffs? Yes. Will they contend for a championship? I highly doubt it.
This is an interesting point of disagreement because if not for Franklin and his just atrocious big game management, it would be this team or Georgia that would probably be my title pick. Like if let's say Ryan Day or Jim Harbaugh were coaching this team, I would pick them to win the Big Ten and potentially win it all. That's just because they've recruited well. I think they have an underrated strength and conditioning staff, and I love their assistants. To me, the problem is Franklin. Everything else can be managed, or the problems can be marginalized and the strengths can be compounded or expanded. I mean, they have Kansas's offensive coordinator. They hired him, Kotelnicki. They returned both their guards and have recruited well on the offensive line for 3 or 4 years in a row. And for the first time in Franklin's career at Penn State, they had a first-team All-Big Ten offensive lineman. So there's a clear improvement on the O-line. And last year's O-line was one of the biggest by size and really good at short power running in football. They don't return all of it, and I think they'll take a little bit of a step back or stay the same. But there are things to like about Penn State. And with Kotelnicki there is the game changer for me. I mean, when I heard of that hiring, I thought to myself, okay, Franklin is finally going to step away from the offense, and even if he doesn't, I mean, this is the best OC hire that he made outside of maybe Joe Moorhead. And Joe Moorhead was the OC during that championship run that they had, and the guy who commanded the 2017 team that was number one in terms of game control and win probability, which is really game dominance. 2017, that was college football statistically most controlling and dominant team, was 2017 Penn State. So I think they're a national title contender, but I'm not picking them to win it. Allar didn't look good in the spring game. The O-line still has work, and that secondary does have questions. I'll have to see it in order to believe it to pick them to win it all, but I think they're a contender. I have them reaching the playoff. And if not for certain matchups, because the playoff seeding, of course, is different this time around, if not for the seeding that I'm projecting them to have, I could have them go as far as playing in the actual national championship, but just falling to Georgia or falling to a team who I think is better than them, especially in the trenches. But I can see why you think that way. Any final thoughts or rebuttal on that Penn State point?
Well, I mean, Quite the opposite, actually. You you pointing out that they do have Andy Kotelnicki as their offensive coordinator. That's very promising. We've already talked about the prowess that he showed at Kansas, um, and the offensive output that Kansas had, even without their starting quarterback. Um, but man, it's still hard for me to fully buy into them as like, okay, this is a top 4 or 5 team in the country, um, until I like with my own eyes see them beat Ohio State or Michigan, which they might. I mean, they might on paper. They'll obviously they don't play the Wolverines this year, but on paper, those if those two teams met at a neutral field, Penn State probably is favored. But we'll see. We'll see. Penn State's a team. I'll say this: I'd like to see Penn State be elite because it makes the Big Ten more fun.
I'd agree with that. And if they get their secondary right and they can have the same run defense they did last year, if Ohio State doesn't have an elite O line, if that's the if, and it based on the spring game, how they've developed and even recruited, but more so its development, strength, and conditioning, it doesn't look like Ohio State will have an elite O line this year. The teams that have beaten Penn State on the ground last year, and to a certain degree the prior year, although the prior year a lot of teams could find some success on the ground against Penn State. Last year, Michigan was the only team that could run on Penn State outside of Ole Miss, but that's because Penn State had no secondary in that game, so Ole Miss spread out that defense. If they can have the same defense they did last year with a better offense, they hosting Ohio State, they should beat them. Like if you put last year's Penn State team with a better OC, better play caller, because they're even with how bad Allar was last year, they had him throw 43 times. If they just ran the ball more, there's a chance that that game could have gone to overtime, or even if balls bounced a different way, that they could have won, but it's unlikely. And Ohio State, we don't know if Ohio State will be better or worse than last year. It's the same thing with Penn State. So can they? Yeah, I agree with you. But will they? That's a question that we have yet to see. What about Michigan? Do you think Michigan is a national championship contender? They lose more than Penn State. But Michigan just won it all last year. So it's kind of an interesting question.
The only reason you would say Michigan, and by you I just mean people in general, the only reason that people would say Michigan is a national championship contender is because they won it last year with less. I'm going to say no. As my honest answer is no. I do not think Michigan is a national championship contender. Are they a playoff contender? 100% they are. Will they make the playoff? That has yet to be seen. There's a few holes that Michigan needs to fill. A couple major, I'll say question marks, because I think there's potential there, but we have yet to see. Number one is at quarterback. J.J. McCarthy, at this point, is going to be legitimately probably will be a top 7 pick in the draft, maybe top 5 or even higher than that. So you're losing him. Alex Orji steps in. He's a big body type of guy, has not been asked to throw the ball much in his career. Doesn't necessarily, it might have to develop a little bit more of a passing game with him. In fact, will have to develop more of a passing game with him if Michigan wants to compete for a national championship or even for a playoff spot. So that's one question. The other question is, hey, you just lost the best running back in Michigan history, at least in my personal opinion. So that's no, when you lose the best quarterback and running back in your school's history, again, in my opinion, that's no easy task to replace. Donovan Edwards is good, but this Michigan squad is going to have to change the style with which how they run the ball. With Blake Corum, it was 3 yards in the cloud dust, 4 yards in the cloud dust. We're going to get up the middle, go downhill, and we're going to pound the rock at you and make you stop us. Donovan Edwards is not that same type of cannonball that Blake Corum is. He's a straight line guy, so it's going to be a lot more pitches maybe with Donovan Edwards, getting him outside the numbers, try to get him some space. So we'll see how the offense and the offensive play calling adjust to that. But there are a lot of questions for Michigan. The whole offensive line leads. I mean, you lose 6 people on the offensive line. You don't really have a clear tight end too. Khalil Mullings is your running back too, who I think is good, but we'll see how he fills in. So there's a lot of questions for Michigan.
I completely agree with the question marks. However, I'm taking the same route almost as Penn State. I think that they are
Wow.
I think that they are title contenders, and the reason for that is their D line and how much they've developed at O line, regardless of what they've lost. That's why. I mean, their D line should be the best in the country with Graham coming back. Same with Grant, and then Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart. Will Johnson is probably going to be the nation's best corner. Nation's best defensive back, we'll see, because Caleb Downs could contend for that. And other players at Iowa, Georgia, Ohio State. We'll have to say, I mean, heck, maybe even Trey Amos, who transferred from Alabama to Ole Miss, with all the, maybe he could, or someone. We don't know. It's hard to do that with individual players, but Michigan has a good collection of individual players despite all they lost. They have questions at safety, at corner, but if they just get one transfer for each of those positions, they'll be deep there again. I'd say the O-line is a big question mark, but you can give them benefit of the doubt. Quarterback and receiver are probably the biggest areas of concern. I can't give Michigan benefit of the doubt at receiver. That's a what if where I'm just going to say no, can't do it. Frederick Moore and Samaj Morgan could be good. They could not. And at quarterback, I like Alex Orji, and I think he'd be above average or good this year. But without the same receiving core as last year, an offensive line that's going to be, at best, the regular season level of play, and at worst, of course, inferior to that, and a defense that won't be as deep. You're playing on the road at Ohio State. You're hosting Texas. You're hosting Oregon. And Michigan's a team that last year, the only reason they won the playoffs is because they were so deep and so dominant that it didn't matter that they weren't built for the playoffs. They just killed you. They kind of won the playoffs in it's not a perfect analogy because Les Miles was just annoying at LSU. But you know that 2011 LSU team that, beat Bama 9-6? That team, inept offensive play calling. Michigan had much better offensive play calling than that team did. In fact, last year I think Michigan had really good offensive play calling. That LSU team would crush the skulls of their opponents, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. And then they ran into Bama in the BCS national championship and lost. I hope I'm not ranting too much, but the point that I'm trying to make is Michigan had one of their worst games of the season against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. And that's because that's what they do. Jim Harbaugh was not known for ever preparing in a bowl game, at least to play at the A-plus level. And Michigan didn't, but they won because they were that good. And then they played better, at least in the second half and first quarter against Washington than you typically see in a bowl game. But they lose so much experience. They have so many questions, like you said. I think they can be a national title contender. But I think there are a few teams like Georgia, Ohio State, obviously those two, and I think even Alabama and Oregon who are better built to win it all and who I'd be more comfortable picking to win it all at this moment. But that D-line is going to be wicked. That's the country's best defensive line right now is Michigan's.
Oh, it's going to be unbelievable. The defense is going to be ridiculous. The questions really are on the offensive end. The defense is pretty much a lock to be elite, minus the linebacking core. The linebacking core, there are a couple of questions. You might need one more good linebacker in there. Of course, and I'm blanking on his name right now, a transfer from
Jayshon Barham.
Yes, Jayshon Barham. He is good. We'll see if he's as good as the guys Michigan trotted out there last year. But you do return a couple guys at the linebacker position. Allow me to pull up depth chart really quick. Yeah. So you do return Josiah Stewart, who played like edge / linebacker. Jayshon Barham, of course. Ernest Hausman also played big snaps last year. But, man, it's tough to replace Michael Barrett. It's hard to replace a 6-year guy. So you're going to be a little worse at linebacker, but defensive line and corner is going to be elite.
Yeah. And and Rod Moore unfortunately got hurt at safety. I mean, I have to mention that, and Sainris still leaving. That's why I want transfer secondary players, because if we suffer another injury, and I didn't mean to say we, but I'm a Michigan fan, and I think that way oftentimes. The secondary could be like Penn State's last year, where you have some elite players, but there are just enough holes where against an elite passing attack, or a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a Zachariah Branch or an Emeka Egbuka if healthy, or even a Tez Johnson at Oregon. I mean, you could get cooked, or a Silas Bolden at Texas, and I don't want that. But yeah, it'll be awesome. I do agree with you too. I think the defense is close, if not already there, to be a lock to be elite. Thank you so much for watching this episode of College Football with Sam. I appreciate it. And I would appreciate it even more if you were to hit that like button, comment your thoughts on this video down below, hit that big red subscribe button, and also click that notification bell so that your phone, laptop, or whatever device you use can ding or buzz whenever I release new content and notify you about it so that you can watch more videos like this. College Football with Sam is the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. We're going to be doing a giveaway when we hit 20,000 subscribers, and we're trying to become one of the best, if not the best, college football channels on YouTube. Your support means so much, and to those of you who are subscribed to my Patreon or purchase merchandise from my store, the links to those are down in the description and pinned comment. Thank you so much. I want to give a shout out to my Patreons. Thanks to Crash2488 for being a Heisman member. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and Connor Little OH for being All-American members. And thanks to Will Loftus, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, guys. And if you're listening on Spotify or any non-YouTube podcast platform, please check the link in the channel description to find my YouTube channel. And if you're listening on YouTube, feel free to check out my Spotify, if you so please. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.